In my first video about Prince Philip, I covered the lives of his parents, Prince Andrew of Greece and Denmark and Princess Alice of Battenberg. A lot of you seemed to like that video, so I thought why not make a second part all about the lives of his four sisters. Princess Margarita of Greece and Denmark was the eldest of the four sisters. She was born at the royal palace in Athens on April 18, 1905, and was thus the eldest great-great-grandchild to Queen Victoria, who passed away 4 years earlier. Despite all traditions of that time, her father Andrew attended her birth because her grandmother Queen Olga believed that it is only justice that men see the suffering they cause to their wives and from which they completely escape. Only a year later, on May 30, 1906, Theodora was born while her father was abroad. She was named Theodora in honor of the famous Byzantine empress, but was called Dala by her family. After the Gaudi coup of 1909, the family, concerned about the situation in Greece, found refuge in the UK, France, and Hesse. The Gaudi coup was a military putsch organized against the sisters' grandfather, King George I of Greece. Nevertheless, the family returned to Greece shortly after, where on June 22, 1911, Cecilie was born. In 1912, the Balkan War broke out and the family was separated. The siblings remained in Athens while their mother worked as a nurse and their father served in the military. In 1913, their grandfather, King George I of Greece, was assassinated and their father inherited his estate in Monrepos, where the family then moved to. Peace returned to the country by August 1913 and the family had the time to travel and visit their relatives. The little princesses thus had the opportunity to see the London Zoo and Westminster Abbey before they had to return back to Greece for Alice's fourth pregnancy. Sophie was born in the family's palace on the island of Corfu on June 26, 1914. To her close relatives she was also known as Tiny. In summer 1914, the First World War broke out, but as Greece remained neutral, this did not affect the then four sisters. But things changed by the end of 1915 when the Serbian army found refuge in Corfu and the siblings, together with their mother, were forced to move to Athens. The threats, especially against royal family members, increased throughout the war. In December 1916, the French bombarded the royal palace in Athens, forcing the four sisters to take refuge in the cellar of the palace. After the deposition of their uncle, Constantine I, the whole family were forced into exile, which they found in Switzerland. They resided firstly in St. Moritz and later in Lucerne. But the family still had to live in worries. In 1918, the Russian Empire fell and several of their close relatives were murdered. And during the German Revolution, the Grand Ducal family of Hesse was overthrown. In 1920, their uncle Constantine I was put back on the throne and the family was able to return back to Greece, where Alice quickly found out that she was pregnant again. In June 1921, the future Prince Philip was born and the sisters were overjoyed. The sisters then enjoyed a quite normal childhood in Corfu, where they received many visits from their relatives. The peace was once again interrupted in 1922 when their uncle Constantine was forced to abdicate once again. The family boarded the HMS Calypso in December 1922 as they had to leave Greece once again. The family settled in France where they lived right next to Princess Marie Bonaparte. The family started struggling with money problems and relied on the generosity of Princess Marie Bonaparte for the next few years. From now on, we will look into the lives of the four sisters separately, starting from oldest to youngest sister. By 1924, Margarita came of age for marriage. Together with her younger sister Theodora, she left regularly for Great Britain and France, where they stayed with their grandmother, Princess Victoria of Hesse and by Rhine. They attended almost all events by the British aristocracy, such as balls, birthdays, and horse races. Margarita met Prince François Ferdinand d'Isenburg-Berstein during one of her stays in Switzerland in 1926. The two were enchanted by one another and their families quickly met soon. However, their romance ended quickly as Margarita was a devoted Orthodox and did not wish to convert to Catholicism for her suitor. By 1930, the then 25-year-old princess was still unmarried. Things quickly changed for Margarita when she met Prince Gottfried, also known as Friedel in the family, later in 1930. They fell in love and married the following year. After a stillbirth in 1933, the couple welcomed 3 kids into their lives: Kraft, Beatrix, and Georg Andreas. On May 1, 1937, Margarita and her husband joined the Nazi Party. The couple used their family connections to promote the Nazi regime in the UK. Gottfried, furthermore, was a part of the Wehrmacht being the armed forces of Nazi Germany. The outbreak of war tore Margarita's family apart. While her husband fought on the German side, her own brother Philip fought on the side of the UK. Margarita in the meantime remained in Langenburg with her children. There, in the middle of the war, Margarita gave birth to twins, Ruprecht and Albrecht. There is a rumor that Gottfried got dismissed by the army in 1944 because of his participation in the assassination attempt on Hitler. Officially, he was dismissed by the army by a decree issued by Hitler banning people of royal descent from serving in the army. Back with his family, the couple transformed their castle into a hospital before welcoming refugees there. After the defeat of Germany and the end of World War II, the family slowly found back to their foreign families, traveling and visiting them in their home countries. Unfortunately, Gottfried died in 1960. Margarita mourned for her husband, but she nevertheless kept up an active social life. In the 1960s, 2 of her kids married, and Margarita kept a close relationship with her sister Theodora until her death in 1969. Margarita was devastated by the loss of her sister, who was a year younger than her. 1969 ended with the loss of her mother, Alice. Sadly, in 1978, Margarita's son Ruprecht committed suicide. 3 years later, in 1981, Margarita died. She was buried in Laufenburg next to her husband. Prince Philip attended the funeral. Theodora was the last of the 4 sisters to become engaged and marry. She married the son of the last Chancellor of the German Empire and Grand Duke of Baden, Berthold Margrave of Baden. The couple married on August 17, 1931, in a double religious ceremony in Baden-Baden. Theodora became Margravine of Baden upon the wedding. After a short honeymoon, the couple moved to Salem Castle, where they welcomed their first child in 1932, Margarita. 2 more kids followed in the next years, Maximilian and Ludwig, who are still alive today. When the Nazi regime arose in Germany, Margarita and Berthold tried to distance themselves from the party, while many of their close relatives were joining the Nazis. However, at the outbreak of World War II, Berthold was enlisted in the Wehrmacht. During the Battle of France, he was seriously wounded and had to return to Salem Castle to be treated there. He remained at Salem Castle for the rest of the conflict, even hiding Jews in his castle while Theodora engaged with the German Red Cross. Approaching the end of World War II, Theodora slowly fell into depression after several close losses in her near family. Firstly, in 1943, her brother-in-law was killed while in action in a plane crash. Then her sister-in-law was killed during an air raid on Frankfurt, and lastly, her father died in 1944 without being able to see his children again. After the monarchy was restored in Greece in 1946, Theodora and her husband frequently made visits to Greece. In the 1950s, their relationship between the British royal family and their German relatives normalized, and they were thus frequently invited over to the UK. Theodora attended the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II in 1953 and was considered to be the Queen's favorite sister-in-law. Theodora suffered from heart problems which started by the end of the 1940s. She had times where she couldn't walk or talk properly and times where she felt absolutely fine. In addition, Berthold suffered a heart attack in 1963 while driving with their son, of which he died from. Lastly, Theodora died on October 18, 1969. Her funeral took place at Baden with her nephew Prince Charles attending. Her brother Philip could not attend since he was on an official trip to Canada. Known as the favorite child of her father, Cecilie was also described as the most beautiful out of all sisters. She made her debut at a ball in the UK at only 17 years old. But although she was considered to be really pretty, it was not easy to find a match for her, which is mostly due to her family's poverty. There were plans to marry her off to Crown Prince Frederik of Denmark, but this plan did not succeed. However, in 1930, Cecilia officially became engaged to her cousin Georg Donatus, whom she first met in 1919. Georg was the son of Ernest Louis, the last Grand Duke of Hesse. The wedding took place on February 2, 1931, in Darmstadt, Germany. The couple settled at Schloss Wolfsgarten, the main residence of Georg's parents since their deposition. There, Cecilia quickly gave birth to 3 children: Ludwig, Alexander, and Johanna. Further, Cecilia was involved in several charitable organizations. When the Nazi regime slowly started spreading in Germany, Cecilia and Georg firstly distanced themselves of it. This mostly because Georg's father, Ernest, was no sympathizer of Adolf Hitler's ideas for Germany. Things changed in 1937 when Georg, together with his brother, joined the Nazi Party, and with them, Cecilia did too. On November 16, 1937, the then 8 months pregnant Cecilia, Georg, and their 2 sons boarded a small plane which should bring them to London for the wedding of Georg's brother. The plane was supposed to land in Ostend, Belgium, to pick up 2 more passengers. When approaching Ostend Airport, thick fog developed, causing the plane to hit the chimney of a factory while trying to land. The plane then crashed against the roof before falling to the ground and catching fire. Cecilia, her family, and her newborn child, to whom she must have given birth to while on the plane, were dead immediately, and so were all other passengers on board. Despite their deaths, Georg's brother's wedding took place the next day. The newlywed couple stopped in Belgium to pick up the remains of Cecilia's family and brought them back to Darmstadt. Back in Darmstadt, Louis, Georg's brother, adopted the only surviving child of the couple, Johanna. The funeral took place on November 23, 1937. Cecilia's parents met there for the first time after being separated for 6 years. However, the couple continued separate lives after. Alice, who had suffered mental health problems for years, claimed that the trauma of her daughter's death healed her. She from then on returned to a completely normal mental state. Sadly enough, Johanna, the only member left from the family, died only 2 years later from meningitis. After meeting a few of her distant cousins in 1927, Sophie fell in love with one of them, Prince Christoph of Hesse. Their romance eventually ended in an engagement in 1930 when Sophie just turned 16. As her favorite sister Cecilie also got engaged at the same time, the 2 future brides prepared for their weddings together. Despite being the youngest of the 4 siblings, Sophie was the first of them to marry. Their marriage took place on December 15, 1930, with Sophie being only 16 years old at that time. Shortly before the wedding took place, Christoph was introduced to the Nazi Party by his cousin, Prince August Wilhelm of Prussia, son of Wilhelm II. Later, Christoph and Sophie even met Adolf Hitler, who deceived them with his charm. Thereafter, Christoph joined the Nazi Party secretly in 1931 and publicly in 1933. In 1932, he also joined the SS, a paramilitary organization led by Adolf Hitler. Sophie never became a member of the Nazi Party, but she did become a member of the National Socialist Women's League, the women's wing of the Nazi Party, in 1938. During the same time, Sophie gave birth to her first 4 children, Christina, Dorothea, Karl, and Rainer of Hesse. To underline the sympathy for Adolf Hitler, their eldest son received, among other names, also the name Adolf. Christoph remained a Nazi sympathizer even at the outbreak of World War II, even joining the Luftwaffe. In the meantime, Sophie moved to Friedrichshof, which is located near Frankfurt. But things changed when the Nazi Party slowly started distancing themselves from the aristocracy. In April 1943, Hitler put Christoph's brother under house arrest, and later that year had his wife Mafalda arrested. Mafalda died while still imprisoned after being seriously wounded by bombings. These events led Sophie to open her eyes about the Nazis. While Sophie was pregnant with the couple's 5th child, Prince Christoph died while in action under mysterious conditions during a plane crash. After being widowed with 5 children, Sophie met Prince George William of Hanover, with whom she got engaged in January 1946. They married later that year and settled near Salem, close to where Theodora was living at that time. With George, Sophie had 3 more children, Wolf, Georg, and Friederike of Hanover. The family lived in a large house provided by Sophie's brother-in-law, but the family nevertheless struggled with money problems for many years. Sophie spent her last months in a nursing home where she died on November 24, 2001. She was the last surviving sibling of Prince Philip. Her funeral was held at Wolfsgarden Castle. Sophie's husband George survived her by 5 years, dying in 2006. At the time of her death, Sophie had 14 grandchildren and 14 great-grandchildren. If you have come this far, I would love to hear from you guys which topic I should cover next. Thanks for listening, and as always, see you back again at Back to History.